is a win for Democrats across the board, but more importantly, this is a win for the American people.
The Democratic Party did extremely well on Tuesday. I do think that it sends a warning signal. I think where we disagree are the causes for that. I mean, let's remember, Donald Trump has only been in office for 9 months.
Trump has not delivered. Cost of groceries is still higher than it was before. Cost of gas continues to go up. Rent is out of control.
I just think that it will be really, really interesting to see how America's largest city see if they embrace socialism and if it can work.
Hello and welcome to Tracking Trump. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Our big focus today is Zohran Mamdani's stunning election victory as mayor of New York City. At 34, he becomes the city's youngest mayor in more than a century, the first Muslim and first South Asian mayor of the Big Apple. His campaign centered on bold progressive promises such as a rent freeze, universal childcare, city-run grocery stores, free public buses for riders, and taxes on millionaires and corporations. What's more, his grassroots movement harnessed social media momentum, small donors and young and diverse coalition that basically carried him past his much more seasoned rivals. Now for the Democrats, Mamdani's win clearly sends a message that the center ground may be shifting and younger progressive voices are no longer on the fringe. It raises a strategic question about whether the party can reinvent itself to embrace this new energy without alienating its moderate base. For the Republicans and in particular for Donald Trump, this result rings as a warning bell. A self-described democratic socialist now leads America's largest city, and he unabashedly challenged Trump directly in his victory speech, telling him to turn the volume up. The Republican base that once felt momentum may now see this as a sign of vulnerability in urban and younger audiences. This is particularly important because the midterm polls in the US are just about a year away. So in short, this victory is not just about New York, it may well be a watershed moment for party identity, for messaging strategy, and for the future of national elections in America. Incidentally, in his victory speech, Mr. Mamdani quoted India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru.
Standing before you, I think of the words of Jawaharlal Nehru. A moment comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. Tonight we have stepped out from the old into the new.
And joining us on DeKoder today, we're happy to have with us Mayor Michael Owens from Mableton, Georgia. He's a Democrat, and it's really nice of him to take out the time to do this for us. And we're very happy to welcome back to the program Republican strategist Matt Klink, who's joining us from Los Angeles very early in the morning. For him, thank you very much to both of you for joining us. I want to begin with you, Mayor Owens. How significant a win is this, not just in New York for the Democrats, but there were important governorships also that the Democrats have won in Virginia and New Jersey. What does this mean for your party and you know, for this particular moment in American politics?
Well, thank you, and I appreciate being on. You know, what we saw in this election across the country, from coast to coast, north to south, was America speaking back and speaking loudly about how unhappy they are with this Trump administration and how frustrated the people are about the empty promises and the fear and the just abject frustration that people have. You know, the victory that not only Mamdani had, but others, you mentioned some of the gubernatorial races. Right here in the state of Georgia, we elected two statewide races for the Public Service Commission. It's the first time, I want to say, in modern history that the Democrats were able to oust two Republicans in a statewide race. So we've seen this over and over again. There's pretty much a clear message that the people are tired of politics that's built on anger, that's built on empty promises, that people want more. And, you know, it was also, I think, very loudly where the youth stepped up. We're always waiting and saying that, you know, it's time for the youth to come out. And, you know, there was coalitions built, again, coast to coast, with our youth coming out. College campuses were buzzing. And I really think that this was about people coming out, embracing diversity, embracing everyone is across the landscape. When you look at the turnout, when you look at the type of people that was coming to support, when you look at independents and moderates across the board, I don't think a lot of this was very clear about, talking about how wages have stagnated, how housing is unaffordable, how we have to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. That was really the important message, I think, across the board. But you saw that being done with very progressive candidates, but you also saw it being done with more mainstream Democrats. This is a win for Democrats across the board, but more importantly, this is a win for the American people. This is for the people that go out and go to work every single day and come home and have bills to pay and try to make ends meet. This was a win for them.
Can I ask you, though, that it's interesting that, Mr. Mamdani's campaign, which focused a lot on affordability, cost of living, and that really drove people out in large numbers to vote for him. On the other end of the spectrum, just a year ago, Donald Trump won on exactly that, but on the other end of the ideological spectrum, right? So what's really changed in the last year, for Trump and the Republican Party, in your view?
Well, I think we cannot ignore the elephant in the room. This is the longest shutdown in American government history, and I have no doubt that played a role into it. But when I talk about empty promises, there are a lot of empty promises. I think there are a lot of people, both on the Democrat but also the Republican side, that saw a lot of empty promises. They heard all this talk about draining the swamp, and quite frankly, it just didn't happen. The swamp is more swampy, is swampier than it's ever been now, and I think the American people are rejecting that. But you are right. There was a lot of people that thought that the Trump presidency was going to mean something for the little guy, right? It's going to mean something for the people who are struggling. It's going to mean something for the people that needed more. And quite frankly, Trump has not delivered. The cost of groceries is still higher than it was before. The cost of gas continues to go up. The rent is out of control. So those promises, quite frankly, were empty, and the American people have rejected it.
Mr. Klink, to get you in on this, would you say the Republicans should be worried at this moment with these results?
Well, look, absolutely. Nobody likes to lose, and I do think that across the board, the mayor is correct that the Democratic Party did extremely well on Tuesday. I think that, frankly, they were going to lose races in New Jersey and in Virginia all along. But the margin of loss, I think, should send a note of caution through people. But I do think the mayor is right. He talked about the two public service commissioners in Georgia. There are also the Republicans lost a supermajority in the state of Mississippi. So I do think that it sends a warning signal. I think where we disagree are the causes for that. Let's remember, Donald Trump has only been in office for 9 months. I do think that in general, the voters are just in a snarly mood, and that, bottom line, they want politicians, and they don't care whether you have an R or a D behind your name. They want politicians to help them with their personal economic situation. And right now, well, some things are better. Gasoline prices are down, egg prices are down, groceries are still expensive, energy costs in general are still high. And I think that they reacted with the way that they did with the party that holds the strings of power right now, which is the Republicans. It doesn't mean that they're doomed for 2026. It just means that after 9 months, they need to look at this and they need to say, all right, we got to get our act together. We got to do some things differently. So sometimes a little reality check is good.
What would you say needs to be done differently? And would you say then the buck has to stop with Mr. Trump? I know he says he wasn't on the ballot. He wasn't. But everyone who campaigned in these elections, whether it was New York, New Jersey, Virginia, it was very much about Donald Trump and his policies and his time in office. So what would you advise the Republican Party to course correct at this point, and particularly Mr. Trump, if he listens?
Well, a couple things. One, Donald Trump will never physically be on a ballot again in his life, but he will be on the ballot in 2026 and again in 2028 because everybody will be pointing toward him and either casting disparaging remarks or trying to link to him in a way that helps their campaign. So in many ways, he's much like Barack Obama. When Barack Obama was on the ballot, Democrats did extremely well. But I will remind people that when Barack Obama was not on the ballot, the Democrats lost 1,900 seats in local, state, and federal jurisdictions during the course of the Obama presidency, largely when he wasn't on the ballot. So what does Trump need to do? Well, one, I think that the benefits for the big, beautiful bill kick in January and February of 2026. I think that that will help. Two, I think that the government needs to open. And as soon as the Democrats stop holding the government hostage and pass a clean continuing resolution, which, by the way, they did 13 times when Joe Biden was president, I think that the government will open. And then look, the Republicans, just like the Democrats are trying to find ways to deal with the economy that's different from the Republicans. The Republicans need to find ways that move the economy forward. And I think that, I think I'd love to spend more time talking about Zohran Mamdani, because I think that the socialist experiment in New York, leaving aside whether he's a democratic socialist, a Democrat, or whatever, I just think that it will be really, really interesting to see how America's largest city see if they embrace socialism and if it can work. If it can work, it sends a powerful message for Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that this has legs. If it doesn't work, then we're reminded what George Will said, that every 20 years or so, countries need to try socialism to remind them why it doesn't work. So I'm really, really interested to see what Mr. Mamdani does in New York. I think it's going to be a lot of...
I think that's a very good point, because like you said, I mean, New York being the financial capital, the largest city, and to embrace a socialist mayor, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. And that brings me then to Mayor Owens again, which is that in a way this has not just stunned the Republicans, but this result, particularly in New York City, has that not also created rumblings within your party, within the Democrats, about what to embrace going ahead? Because what works in New York City today may not necessarily work in other parts of America, particularly as you go west. So is there a genuine dilemma within the Democratic Party today on what to embrace ideologically? Be a socialist like Mamdani or be more centrist?
No, I think the real challenge that the Democratic Party is going to have is not one between centrist Democrats and democratic socialists. It is how we allow our youth to move forward and have a voice, and how do we step forward with those who have new ideas and a willingness to connect with where the people are. And I think that is what the other night showed us. You talk again, I want to talk about housing costs and energy bills. Here in Georgia, we've had 5 rate hikes in a row, 5. And that is what the people went out and voted for. We had a state representative now who came in elected as a democratic socialist. And there was concerns, there was rumblings, and everything has been fine. I don't think the issue that Zohran Mamdani has about being a democratic socialist, I think that is largely fodder for the knees, right? That makes it red meat, if you will, for the Republicans. At the end of the day, what Mamdani has talked about, what really connected with people, was about stagnation of wages, energy bills continue to go up, housing costs, the cost of rent. Those are things. And you know what those are? Those are, you talk about making life affordable for people. And that's what people are. And that crosses regions, that crosses demographics, that crosses party labels. And this is where the real focus needs to be on. So we're talking about, running on policy and running on messages at work. The challenge now, the real challenge, is not going to be about where people feel about him being a socialist or democratic socialist. It's going to be about the policies and where those policies lie, and putting real government in action that's going to work for the people. That is what the people voted for. His label, or what he calls himself, people are really focusing on what are the policies you're going to bring. Are you going to try to do your best as mayor or as a governor or a public service commission? What policy are you going to put in place to make it more affordable for people to live? And that's the first.
Sure. So, but isn't it also a fact that there is a section of the Democratic Party that is not comfortable with Mr. Mamdani's socialist agenda? they think that it may alienate, more centrist voters who otherwise would have gone with the Democrats. They see him as, well, for want of a better label, a little more left wing than they would be comfortable with.
And that's, I also want to say that's no different than the Republican Party. I mean, they have their folks that are, we can call themselves Reagan Republicans, and you have the MAGA Republicans. We have that in American society, and that's no different than any other party. But when you really focus on what was the important part about this is about meeting people where they are. This is about hearing people's challenges and struggles. And yes, New York City is one of the greatest cities in the world. New York City will figure it out. New York City has spoken very loudly about who they want and what they want. But also, I don't want to dismiss the fact of the youth that's coming out and saying the struggles that our next generation is having, not only in the workplace and saddled with student debt, but also being placed in a situation to lead, right? And making sure that they can step up now and that their leadership reflects them as well in a lot of ways. I still think that is a pretty loud narrative we should be talking about. And people vote when they have something to believe in. People vote when people and elected officials or candidates are talking about items that impact their everyday lives, right? And for us, that should be a wake-up call for success. For Republicans, that should be a wake-up call to why they lost.
Let me take that back to Mr. Klink on this issue of the wake-up call for the Republicans. I mean, would you say that strategists within the party today would be looking at the fact that young people in particular, came out in such big numbers to vote for Mr. Mamdani, and therefore there are lessons that they need to take away from this? And I also wanted you to reflect for a moment on the fact that, Mr. Mamdani was also faced with a sort of torrent of Islamophobic attacks, a lot of misinformation about him, his background, what he stood for, and instead New York City voted overwhelmingly for him. Is there a lesson somewhere, for the MAGA Republicans in particular about this?
Well, you're conflating two topics that don't have any relation to each other. So let's be very clear. Republicans constitute 28% of registered voters in New York City. So the fact this is a deep blue city. You had Curtis Sliwa, who ran for like the third time as the Republican candidate, but the real race was between Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo, a 68, I think, year-old disgraced governor for the state of New York, who ran a pretty lackluster campaign that didn't mobilize people. So
but
to think that, or to say, well, if an endorsement constitutes, I would take a bad Democrat over a good Democratic socialist. Okay, true. I don't think that Cuomo didn't believe that it was an endorsement, but to say that the youth of New York City reflect the youth nationwide, that's the problem with these midterm elections or these off-cycle 2020, odd year elections, is that they are not a good predictive model for what the next cycle will be. Let me give you a real world example. In 2023, a Democratic governor won in Kentucky, which is a deep blue or deep red state. And the Democrats won races in the state of Virginia. And everybody speculated that it would bode very well for the Democrats heading into the 2024 elections. Well, we know what happened in the 2024 elections. The Democrats got swamped. Kentucky stayed red. And Virginia, well, it did ultimately stick with Kamala Harris and by 6 points. It was by no means the blowout that we saw on Tuesday for Abigail Sparrenberger. My point in all of this is New York City and the young voters in New York City, they're significantly different than the rest of the United States population. Yes, they voted overwhelmingly for someone who was a 34-year-old who was active on TikTok and who spoke to them, to use the mayor's words, and I 100% agree with him. He went where they were and he talked to them in language that related to them. The challenge is which party will be better able to do that heading into 2026. And right now, I think that is still totally open and it's up for grabs. Republicans, Donald Trump in particular, did it very, very well in 2024, largely speaking to young men who felt disenfranchised by the Democratic Party, who told them that they were the problem. And it appears right now, at least in New York City, that the young voters there, they liked Zohran Mamdani, and to be honest with you, they wanted free stuff. How could you not? I mean, New York, if they look back 2 centuries, New York has always been expensive. It's never an inexpensive city. But childcare in New York City costs $26,000 a year. Zohran Mamdani, by the way, who was in Albany, New York, he was a state representative. He knows that New York City, he can't raise income taxes on people. He can't raise taxes on corporations. So he needs Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, to cooperate. He needs the federal government to help. And Donald Trump said that he would provide the bare minimum for New York. So the challenge that Mr. Mamdani is going to have is there's campaigning Mamdani and there's governing Mamdani.
But that's true of politicians everywhere. I think, what happens in a campaign and when you actually have to govern, that's the real challenge. And I guess you're right that the real challenge does start now. I'm going to give Mayor Owens the last word on this. Is it just about youngsters in New York wanting free stuff? But on a more serious note, doesn't Mr. Klink have a point, which is that the midterms are still a year away? And a lot can change. In politics, they say a week is a long time. A year is an eternity.
It is right. I mean, news cycles continue to turn, but people's challenges in this country have remained persistent, right? And they're the needs that people have, like I said, the hardworking people who get up every day, they're still facing these challenges. And so, if this race or this election night was just limited to Mamdani, I think the Republicans would have more of a point about this, but it wasn't. Again, we saw what happened in Prop 50 in Georgia. We saw what happened on the East Coast from New York to New Jersey to Washington, to Virginia to the state of Georgia. The people spoke, right? And this is an opportunity for us now to change gears and really dig into these policies and make sure that if the Republicans want to continue to be a party of the rich and the elite and just a few and ignore the calls and struggles of the everyday people, I think the Democrats will continue to see success. What I want is what's best for every American that is here. As a mayor, my responsibility, I serve technically in a nonpartisan role, right? My job is to get up and do the best I can for all 80,000 people that live in my city. And what I hear across the board is the cost of living in this country is just too high. So any elected official or any candidate that is speaking to affordability and is speaking to where the people are and going to meet those people on the campaign trail, then ultimately will govern with that same message, I think will be successful. And that's what we need for the people to be successful in this country.
Well, it's been fascinating to dissect these election results with both of you, Mayor Owens, Matt Klink. Thank you very much for joining us today and giving us some perspective. It looks like it's going to be a very interesting year as we head into the midterms in the United States next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us.
That's it on the show this week. We'll be back with much more next week. Do join us then.
This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume